Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. Yeah. Hi, guys. I'm Daddy Freeze, convener of the Free the Sheeple movement and leader of the Free Nation in Christ. I greet you all and I bring glad tidings. Today, I would love to talk about King James, his legacy of slave trade, and biblical mistranslations. I'm just waiting for everywhere to populate. All right, I think we have a few people here. Let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you to bless you and praise you, worship and glorify you. We ask for your wisdom and your direction. We ask for the knowledge from above, the knowledge that the wisdom of this world cannot comprehend. And we ask for you to shine your light upon us, not just now, but always, as you reveal your truth to us in Yahushua's name. Amen. So, today, a lot of people are protesting, a lot of people are fighting, and, you know, I saw statues being toppled. But a lot of us Nigerians are missing the point. They're going to open churches on the 19th, and you're going to go there and read the King James Bible. You're jubilating that the statue of a slave trader is being pushed into the canal, but then you're reading a book written by a slave trader. So these things are things we need to investigate. I have books and journals and articles and videos from the BBC about King James' life, but I cannot start reading all of them to you online. However, I'd like us to work with facts available online. And I want us to use sources that everybody can attest to. And if you have any problem with those sources, you can bring your sources that counter what they're saying. I'm not very big on Wikipedia and Google information sourcing, but because what we're talking about is something that is available to a lot of people, I want us to risk using this. And if you have any information that counters this, any credible information that counters this, I'm willing to be open to it, because I'm only reading portions that I have read in more accurate journals. But unfortunately, I cannot share with you. Yes, I know Google is restricted, and same thing with Wikipedia. Lots of people can edit Wikipedia. I know of those limitations. However, I'm working with what I have confirmed from other sources, and I put it up to you to confirm these things or to debunk these things with credible information. So, I want to quickly start by talking about the King James Version, because a lot of people don't know the origin of this Bible. So the King James Version is also known as the King James Bible, or the Authorized Version, AV, and it's an English translation of the Christian Bible for the Church of England. Commissioned in 1604 and completed as a well-published book in 1611 under the sponsorship of King James 6 and 1. I'm going to talk about King James 6 and 1 and explain to you why he's called King James 6 and 1. The books of the King James Version include the 39 books of the Old Testament, an intertestament section containing 14 books of the Apocrypha, and 27 books of the New Testament. Now listen to this. It is noted for its majesty of style. The King James Version has been described as one of the most important books in the English culture and a driving force in the shaping of the English-speaking world. So the English King James Version is more so a culture dissemination tool than a scriptural, biblical, spiritual book. Let's establish that. And you can debunk this with any other sources you have. I'm open to that discussion, but I want to tell you not to waste your time because you'll be backing up the wrong tree and burning up your energy flogging dead horses. Now, who is King James, or who was King James 6 and 1? And why was he called King James 6 and 1? Well, he was the King of Scotland as King James the Sixth from the 24th of July, 1567, all the way down till when he died, and Ireland as King James the First from the union of the Scottish and English crowns on the 24th of March, 1603, until his death in 1625. The kingdoms of Scotland and England were individual sovereign states with their own parliaments, judiciaries, and laws, though both were ruled by James in personal union. Now, if you've watched the movie, I like to also reference the movie, Mary, Queen of Scots. A beautiful story. Is it available on Netflix? Let me try and see if it's available on Netflix. So I'd advise Mary, Queen of Scots. Scots. Okay. I'm not sure it's available on Netflix, but I'm sure you would have seen the movie. Um, you know the story. Mary and her cousin Elizabeth the First, who died childless, and then Elizabeth wanted Mary to denounce King James because apparently he was born to some French guy who was divorced and also was queer. Just watch the movie. It's a nice narrative that ends up with Mary losing her life at the end of the movie, and because she didn't allow him to be established as a bastard, that led to him being the first king of Scotland and England. Now, we need to understand a lot about King James. There was a portion of his life where he visited Denmark, a country familiar with witch hunts, and this sparked an interest in the study of witchcraft, which he considered a branch of theology. As far as King James was concerned, witchcraft was a branch of theology. He also attended the North Berwick witch trials, the first major persecution of witches in Scotland under the Witchcraft Act of 1563. Several people were convicted of using witchcraft to send storms against James' ships, and most notably was a certain lady called Agnes Sampson. She was involved in the North Burke witch trials. And if you read her story, in the spring of 1590, King James was returning from Copenhagen after marrying Anne of Denmark, daughter of the King of Denmark and Norway. The Danish court at that time was greatly perplexed by witchcraft and the black arts, and this must have impressed King James. The voyage back from Denmark was beset by storms. In the following months, a witch hunt began in Denmark. One of the victims was Anna Coldings, who gave the names of 5 women, including Male, the wife of the Boron Master of Copenhagen, and the women all confessed that they'd been guilty of witchcraft in raising storms and threatening Anne of Denmark's voyage, and sent devils to climb up the keel of her ship. In September 1590, 2 women were burnt as witches, and James decided to set up his own tribunal in Scotland. The story of the arrest, trial, and confession of Agnes Sampson and the others accused of witchcraft is known from versions found in pamphlets in London. So, you can also find your time to read about Agnes, whose ghost is said to be roaming the Holyrood Palace, and her ghost is said to be naked, as she was stripped and tortured of witchcraft after she was accused of witchcraft. All that and more. I'm just trying to get you into the mind frame of the kind of person King James was. Now, we also remember Guy Fawkes and the gunpowder plot and all that. I don't want to go too much into it, but I think he had a much better rule in Ireland than England. So, now, King James was mourned when he died. For all his flaws, he had largely retained the affection of his people, who enjoyed uninterrupted peace and comparatively low taxation. So they kind of liked him. Now, I want us to read about King James and slave trade. So just type King James, VI, that is 6, and I, that is 6 and 1, slave trade. Just put it C. As early, now this is from an official, I'm no longer using Wikipedia now. I'm now using the NPS website. Okay? And this is the National Park Service website, which is, of course, much more authentic than the Wikipedia and other sources. Now, let's talk about this. As early as 1618, let's remember 1618, King James was actively in power. He didn't pass on until 1625. Let me get the dates right. I think he died 1625 or 1665. I need to get the dates accurate. Okay, he died in 1625. I'm correct. So in 1618, he granted a patent to a company that went to trade for gold and precious wood in Africa. And by 1668, over a quarter of the new company's profits were derived from slave trade. So the Royal African now, if you also read the Jamaican Observer, the Jamaican Observer also has something to say. And here's an article by Shalom Scott. I'm just going to take a bit of it for you. And these are things you can actually verify yourself. Elizabeth partnered with John Hawkins by renting him for use as a slave ship, the huge old 700-ton Navy ship Jesus of Lubeck. Lubeck being a town in Germany where the ship was made. Now, this gets very funny. It says, and the song, "We will wait till Jesus comes to carry our loved ones home," referred to Hawkins' slave ship. Now, you could get this article on the Jamaica Observer. Please do your due diligence and check it out. The original meaning of that song to slaves was literally going back home to Africa, as when they were sold by Hawkins, he promised he will have them returned. He will have returned to collect the slaves. They believed him, hence they put music to their expectation of going back home. Many sacred English hymns and verses and lines, which also resonated with our ancestors' dreams of returning to the homeland. Now, John Hawkins, who, by the way, was supposed to be a pirate, was not the first Englishman to trade in slaves, but he was the first to run the triangular trade from Africa to the Americas and back to England, making a profit from every stop for over 150 years. According to the Jamaica Observer, the British royal family not only owned but monopolized the slave trade. The story is that Queen Elizabeth heard that England was trading in slaves. She cried. Then she was shown the products, salt, coffee, sugar, gold, pearls, etc., being brought to England, and immediately became a partner in the trade. The so-called Elizabethan period was financed with money from slavery and slave trade. I'm not making this up. You could check the Jamaican Observer for this. Just Google Jamaican Observer and British monarchy's involvement in slave trade. Now, so the British monarchy generally had this history of King James, and there was a period when slave trade was abolished in England, and before that period, from about the late 1500s till about the early 1800s, there was active slave trade. So, it's really impossible to cut slave trade or to cut the British monarchy generally or King James out of the slave trade narrative. Now, I want us to talk about that book, that ship, Jesus of, imagine a slave ship named Jesus. Okay, I'm just trying to. I'm just gonna try to keep quiet about that. So I want you to work with me. I'm trying to take my time and be very slow about it, so you will not make any errors. You guys will be able to have access to this. You could verify. You could cross check. You understand, and you could discard the information I'm sharing. For all you know, it is wrong. But just do your due diligence. Now, Jesus of Lubeck was a carrack built in the free city of Lubeck in the early 16th century, around 1540, which had been used for impress representative purposes and was acquired by Henry VIII, King of England, to augment his fleet. The ship saw action during the French invasion of the Isle of Wight, I beg your pardon, in 1545, and she, along with Samson, were used in an unsuccessful attempt to raise Henry VIII's flagship. Okay? Now, Jesus of Lubeck became involved in the Atlantic slave trade under John Hawkins. I spoke to you earlier on about John Hawkins, that was also referenced in the Jamaican Observer, who organized 4 voyages to West Africa and the West Indies between 1562 and 1568. During the last voyage, Jesus, along with several other English ships, encountered a Spanish fleet. And in September 1568, in the resulting battle, Jesus was captured by the Spanish forces, and the heavily damaged ship was later sold to a local merchant. Okay, so there were 4 shippings done with a ship called Jesus. See why I don't really like that name. Okay, so it's very interesting stuff you're finding out today. Now, let us remember that this ship last sailed in September 1568. That was the last sailing. That's the last sail. Now, let us Google King James reign. King James reign timeline. Someone says, how do I know that I'm reading what happened? That's why I'm referencing Jamaican Observer, referencing this, and also backing up what I have read previously that I cannot use on social media, because I want you to have facts that you can reference. So he was the King of Scotland from June 1567 until March 1625. This is history. You have access to it everywhere. This is not distorted. I know when history is distorted. So between 1567 and 1625. 1567 is when King James was in power to 1625. It is said in many accounts, according to history, that the royal family benefited from slave trade. Remember the dates, 1567, 1625. Jesus of Lubeck was involved in the Atlantic slave trade even before King James was king, right from Elizabeth I. And Elizabeth I, according to available history, benefited. Somebody, teacher said, please, when you finish your sermon, please, some engine oil to the inches of that is making that noise. What is making noise? I can't hear any noise. Can you hear any noise? So let's work with this. You could go to British museums. Like I said, this is open to your interpretation. Go to a museum of your choice. Debunk everything I'm saying. You don't have to take it. I'm not rushing you. I'm not telling you. These are not some of the times I come and tell you, oh, this is. So if King James came into power 1567, this ship stopped selling slaves in 1568. And there was active slave trade. Let's put this to Google again. Don't trust me. How long did slave trade last? Put the word England. Now, also remember that Elizabeth I, King James was the successor to Elizabeth I. Because Elizabeth had no children, he succeeded her. He was her cousin Mary's son. So Britain was the most dominant between 1640 and 1807 when the British slave trade was abolished. King James came into power. This was the most active time. Hold on. It started off during the Queen Elizabeth period and then grew to the most active time at about 1640. And one of the things that the successors of King James used to trade the slaves was that Bible. That everything's going to be all right. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. I'll just quickly go to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. Slaves, obey your masters with respect and fear and with the sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Now, there have been a lot of translations and mistranslations and misinterpretations of this particular verse. A lot of people have said he was taken out of context. I find it hard. I understand that today we can say that this was taken out of context, but when he was being fed to the slaves, it was a totally different context. It was like, hey, you guys should not revolt. You guys should not talk. You guys should just chill and do what we're telling you to do. Now, there was, if you remember, one of the earliest slave trade boats was the Jesus of Lubeck. So slave trade started with Jesus. Can I say that? Can I say that? Or am I wrong to say slave trade started with Jesus? When Jesus, Google this, search this, leave Google, go to museums and read about Jesus of Lubeck. Now, now, let us also talk about, let's talk about America, history of America. Let's just talk about that. Just put this to Google. I just want to bring out some quick things. I want to look for the most simple to show you how America started off initially being the land of the native Indians and how Native Americans lived in America for thousands of years. English people in 1607 went to the place now called Jamestown, Virginia. Now let us remember that 1607 was smack dab in the middle of King James' reign. Remember, King James came in from 1567 to 1625. So 1607 is right there somewhere in the middle. And they went to a place called Jamestown, Virginia. Why was it called Jamestown? Do I really need to explain why? But anyway, just other European settlers went to colonies mostly from England, and later Great Britain, France, Spain, and Netherlands also colonized North America. So in 1775, a war between the 13 colonies and Britain began when the colonists were upset over paying taxation to their government in the UK, but were not given any chance to vote in the UK British elections to continue to contribute to how the money was spent. So a war broke out because of money. All right. So Native Americans lived in America for thousands of years. How many Native Americans do you see left in America today? I just want to ask, is Donald Trump Native American? Is Barack Obama Native American? How many Native Americans do you have left today? So what they did was they came and they took over their land. I don't know if I'm connecting. They came and they took over the land. Now, native Indians were in America when Europeans arrived. They had many different tribes. But right now, they've been pushed to corners here and there. I don't even want to talk about it because that's not the essence of what I came here to do. Next thing I want to talk about is put up the Google, the history of Australia. Just put history of Australia. How did Australia come to being? Let's also read about that. The first known landing in Australia by Europeans was in 1606 by the Dutch navigator Willem Janszoon. So, once again, the Europeans went to Australia. Who were living in Australia? Who are the people living there? Indigenous Australians, or the Aborigines. That's what they were called. Now, if you read about the indigenous Australians, they are people who descended from groups that lived in Australia that surrounded islands before the British colonization. Once again, British colonization. They include the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, people of Australia. You go there now, how many Aborigines do you have compared to those who colonized and came there and took over? Now, it is impossible to deny the partaking of the King James royal family in slave trade. It is impossible to deny. It is impossible to divorce King James from slave trade. The person who handed over to him was trading slaves or benefited from slave trade. He also benefited from slave trade, and his successors, benefited immensely from slave trade. Not just slave trade, from going to other people's lands and colonizing. Remember, Nigeria too used to be a British colony? So, I do not see how we can divorce, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much you try to blur the information, no matter how much you try to avoid what's glaring, You cannot divorce the British royal family or the British royalty from slave trade. Even if they came to abolish it many years later, how do you think the Africans got to America? How do you think the Jamaicans got to America? They were all taken there as slaves. And then, 400 years later, a new type of slavery started. Okay, you're no longer slaves. Slave trade has been abolished. You've now been upgraded to the N's. I don't want to use it because it's considered a bad word. So you're now N's. You're no longer slaves. You're N's, and police can kneel on your necks. So you got an upgrade. Now, I want to go a little further. So one of my issues with King James is, one, read the history of the King James Bible. That's why I started it with. Go to Google again. Just type King James or KJV, King James Bible. Somebody say, Daddy Freeze, you need to shave. Yes, I'm going to shave one of these days. But since I'm at home, I'm not going anywhere. I'm feeling like John the Baptist and Aaron right now. So the King James Bible, or the Authorized Version, is an English translation of the Christian Bible for the Church of England, commissioned in 1604 and completed and published in 1611 under the sponsorship of King James VI and the First. It's noted for its majesty of style. The King James Version has been described as one of the most important books in English culture and a driving force in the shaping of the English-speaking world. Now, let us remember that the English-speaking world is not England. It's England and all their colonies. The Americas, Australia, many parts of Africa, of course, Nigeria. So it's a culture and driving force in the shaping of England and the colonies of England. What does that mean? It means that it is part of the tools used to establish slave trade and the slavery of the mind, where you subtly believe that God is a white king. That's the majesty of style. God anoints the kings and touch not the anointed, meaning you can't go against the king. It all started with this particular Bible. Do I forgive King James and the colonial masters? Yes, because if I don't forgive them, I'm also supposed to not forgive us, because when they handed power over to us in 1960, the Nigerian passport was almost on par with a UK passport. I know people back then, elder uncles, who had Nigerian passport that was actually a British passport. And when it expired, when Nigeria gained independence, they were told to come and renew as British passports. And some people decided that, what do I need a British passport for? Please, 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 I want to be Nigerian. But one or two were smart enough to renew their British passports, because anybody who was traveling before 1960 was doing so on a British passport. So when it was time to renew the passports, many of them got British passports and still had British passports till today. All they kept doing was renewing and renewing and renewing. Without ever being born in England or growing up in England, they had access to the passport because the Nigerian passport was on the equivalent of a British passport. Now let's move forward again to the year 1984. My grandmother died in Romania, and my mother had to travel with us to see her mother or her family. And I remember coming back and my father coming to meet us in Romania. And my dad didn't need a visa to go to the UK, but we couldn't get to the UK because we needed a visa, and Romanians were not given visas back then. So we had to come home through Switzerland while my dad went for 1 week to jollificate in the UK on his Nigerian passport. Between then and now, the Nigerian passport has grown in worthlessness, while the Romanian passport, as of today, does not need a visa into the UK. So if I'm still angry with King James over the slave trade, I also have to be angry with our ancestors who they gave independence. They gave a currency that was the equivalent of $1 and slightly less than a pound. They gave a passport that was the equivalent of a British passport. And what did they do with it? They squandered it, messed it all up to the point where you bring out the Nigerian passport in any part of the world, including Libya, you're frowned at, they immediately devalue whatever it is you're offering. That's the power of the squandering, the greed, the lies, the manipulation, and the politics our own ancestors played and is now enslaving us because we do not have the resources we once had. We've squandered everything available, messed all the beautiful things we have, and now grown in population times 4 or 5. So, do I forgive King James for the slave trade? Yes. But I don't cut them out of the narrative. And I will never read a book that comes from people whose job was to colonize. Because not only did they colonize our lands, they also colonized our minds. They would come and tell you that they brought education to Africa. Meanwhile, in Acts chapter 8, the Ethiopian eunuch was reading aloud, meaning he was educated, he could read, at a time when the English language had not been invented. At a time, no such thing, at a time when there was no such thing as an English Bible. An African was already reading scriptures. I can overlook all that, but there's one thing that I find very hard to overlook: the errors in the King James Bible. And the errors are too numerous. Take Acts chapter 12, verse 4, for instance. The word Easter, that came from a Teutonic goddess called Easter, was used in place of the word Passover. And that is how we began to celebrate Passover. Sorry, we began to celebrate Easter, named after a goddess of fertility. And it doesn't end there. If you read Acts chapter 7, verse 45, every other Bible translation uses the word Joshua. King James uses the word Jesus. He made a mistake because, well, Joshua and Jesus were both Yahushua originally. Same thing with Barabbas. He was also Yahushua. In Greek, he was Yesu ton Baraban. But because of whatever manipulation, they changed Joshua to Yehoshua in Joshua to Joshua, Yehoshua in Barabbas to Barabbas, and then Yehoshua in Christ to Jesus. So well and good, no problems. I'm just pointing out the errors to you. The word Lucifer. If you check the word Lucifer in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12, St. Jerome translated the word Hallel to Lucifer. King James picked up the word Lucifer, or his translators used the word Lucifer. Meanwhile, every other place where Jerome used the word Lucifer, King James people dropped. Because there were 4 times the word Lucifer was mentioned in the scriptures. One was Isaiah 14:12, that was referring more so to the king of Babylon than to Satan, because if you read 14:20, it says he'll be buried. I don't know if Satan's ever going to be buried. I don't know about those false narratives. But every other place where the word Lucifer was used, it was used to reference God, or Peter himself in 2 Peter chapter 1. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 19. Peter himself is referring to Christ as Lucifer. That's another error. We don't want to talk about the mention of creatures. This guy is just going to keep calling me, so I'm going to pick up the call next. I'm rounding off anyway. So this just goes on and on and on. Two reasons why I personally do not like the King James Bible: the involvement of the British monarchy in slave trade and colonization. Sometimes it looks like it's a good thing that we're colonized. Most times it looks like the essence of our history was destroyed. We had queens in Africa. Ethiopia had a Kandake as far back as the book of Acts. The first British queen was 1,500 years later. So how could you colonize us and help us? You colonized us and robbed us of everything, including our identity, and you sold your identity to us as ours. Meanwhile, it is yours that was twisted in order to make us look subservient to you. That is why black lives don't matter, because originally we were created even superior in every way. You can't get black out of white, but you can get white out of black. So this is where I want us all to pick this from and do a bit of our own personal research. Let's ask the questions. Let's not just take everything handed over to us hook, line, and sinker. God bless you all.